another difficult part of the world, Afghanistan. Such a contrast from the peaceful spot that we're standing in. There are nearly 18,000 spots in the special immigration program that are now essentially taken. These are for Afghans who worked for Canada in that war. Now, will Canada commit to expanding this program, even if it means taking in more than the originally promised 40,000 Afghan refugees?
Obviously, Canadians know how important it is to build a better future for the Afghan people. Canadians from across the country, indeed many Nova Scotians, stepped up over the years in our military efforts to defend the Afghan people, in our humanitarian investments, in our support. So the Taliban taking back control of Afghanistan is heartbreaking, and Canadians want to continue to help, which is why we stepped up with a larger announcement than just about any other country in the world in committing to over 40,000 Afghans coming to Canada in these difficult years that we're looking at right now. The challenge, of course, is that there are millions of people in Afghanistan who are hoping for a better future. There are hundreds of thousands of people who would like to come to Canada. And we have to make sure that even as we are welcoming in 40,000, and as Canadians are opening their homes and their communities to welcome these refugees fleeing, many of whom have links to Canada, direct service to Canada over many difficult years, we're going to have to figure out how to step up and support people who remain in Afghanistan with humanitarian support, with investments, with the global community that is extremely concerned, rightly, about the Taliban's sponsoring of terrorism around the world. But we have to make sure we are getting food and supplies and a future to people in Afghanistan, even if the Taliban isn't. And it is a difficult issue, but I can tell you that Canadians remain focused on trying to be the country that everyone around the world knows us to be, which is there to support, thoughtful and generous about bringing people here, but understanding that investments there are also the way to go, and we're going to continue doing that.
Next question.
Yeah, hello. Just to follow up on Afghanistan, it's been roughly a year since the feds launched the special program for Afghan immigrants. And just looking back on a year since that program launched, what are the successes and failures of that program? I'm
going to turn to our immigration minister to speak a little bit to that as well, but I can say that every situation is different around the world. You will remember that we got elected back in 2015 with a commitment to bring in very short order, 25,000 Syrian refugees. It was a clear moment where the world needed to step up, where the previous Conservative government had simply not wanted to engage. And we saw Canadians from coast to coast to coast opening up their communities, their homes, wanting to do more. And I can say 7 years later that the Syrian Canadian community is doing extraordinarily well and contributing in small towns and big cities right across the country. It's one of those great, great stories. And yes, we very much want to do similar things for Afghanistan with the 40,000 we've committed to, understanding, however, that the situation is very different. The challenge right now is actually getting people out of Afghanistan, which the Taliban is not allowing for. It's extremely difficult to even process people in country right now. So yes, we've brought in thousands of vulnerable people fleeing from Afghanistan, many of whom came through neighboring countries. But there's a lot more to do, and we're going to keep doing that. But Sean, why don't you take a couple of...
Certainly. Look, thank you for the question, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that we're still receiving questions about Afghanistan, despite a lot of other enormous challenges in the global situation today. I think it's important that Canadians don't forget those who've helped us. So your question was really about the challenges and successes involving the mission of resettling at least 40,000 Afghan refugees. The challenges are really driven by situational factors on the ground, not by government decisions along the way. Just to put a finer point on the argument the Prime Minister just outlined, What people don't appreciate is the global system of resettling refugees is designed to move people who've been displaced in many cases for a number of years, who we have access to, who've been vetted by global agencies such as the UNHCR. After we formed government in 2015, a lot of people don't conceptualize it this way, but the Syrian refugee resettlement effort really took place 3 years after the war had begun. Hundreds of thousands, likely millions of people had already fled, and we were dealing with groups of people who, by and large, found temporary safe haven in refugee camps or in other countries in the region. What we had to do in that instance was identify people who were eligible to come to Canada, fly airplanes over, and bring them to Canada. The difficulty was more on the resettlement side, finding communities who maybe didn't have the muscle memory because for many years we didn't have such ambition when it came to resettling refugees. Of course, since then, Canada has become the top destination in the world for the resettlement of refugees in each of the last number of years. And in 2020, we actually resettled 1/3 of the global total of refugees that were resettled anywhere. Just to put draw into focus the contrast and the situation that we're dealing with in Afghanistan. We're dealing with a territory that's been seized by the Taliban, a listed terrorist entity under Canadian law. These are people who don't have interest in helping people destined for Canada. They don't have interest in helping the Canadian government for reasons that are perhaps obvious. Even if they wanted to, they don't have the expertise in how to manage the flow of people or even operate a professional airport. At every step of the way, the challenges in Afghanistan are much greater than in other situations where we've been involved in resettlement. In particular, even when we have successes along the way in negotiating an agreement with Pakistan to let people destined for Canada into that country for onward travel to Canada, we see a response from the Taliban where they indicate that they're going to close the border to these individuals unless they have an Afghan passport that's been issued by the Taliban. For reasons I'm sure you can appreciate, not many of the people who are fleeing persecution at the hands of the Taliban want to approach them for a passport so they can come to Canada. These are the challenges that we're dealing with on the ground, and securing safe passage has been and remains the #1 challenge to get people successfully resettled in Canada. Despite these challenges, I can tell you there's hardly been a thing in my life I've been more proud of. I've met a lot of the people who live in our communities today. I was visiting Calgary a couple of months ago. A gentleman stopped me in the street and asked me, "Are you Sean Fraser?" I had no idea how he'd recognize who I am. I mean, I'm 6'7", maybe he can pick me out in the street. He gave me a giant hug and said, "I arrived 2 weeks ago. I just left quarantine because I wanted to follow the rules when I got to Canada. This is the first time I've been out on the city, on Stephen Avenue downtown." He said, thank you to Canada. We're so grateful." We parted ways, and 90 seconds later, he came back running down the street with 9 friends, all of whom were having their first social outing in Canada. The tears in that conversation were something I will never forget for the rest of my life. I went to Pearson International Airport when we welcomed the cohort that included the 10,000th Afghan refugee who landed in Canada. And I saw families with kids the same age as my kids who don't know the challenges that their parents were facing when they brought them to safety. But their parents were kissing the ground on the tarmac when they finally found safety in our country. So far, there's almost 17,000 human beings who are safe in Canada who've been given a second lease on life. Our commitment on a per capita basis is by far the largest in the world. On a raw numbers basis, we're one of the most substantial of any country in the world when it comes to Afghanistan, at the same time that we continue to have a global leading effort to help Ukrainians who are fleeing this unjust war of aggression. But one of the things that I think is important is we realize that the people who are coming here, we can't think of these people as charity cases. They arrive with a lot more than the contents of their suitcases. They want to give back. They want to work. And one of the most heartwarming things that I've seen is Afghan refugees who landed in Canada just a few short months ago are some of the first people to volunteer to help Ukrainians. And they tell me they want to do it because they understand what it's like to be fleeing war, violence, and persecution. And they understand what it's like to have a country put their hand up and say, "We want to provide safe haven to you." And they want to be part of that for the next tranche of vulnerable people who are seeking safe haven. So from my perspective, sure, we have work to do. Sure, challenges remain when it comes to securing safe passage for vulnerable Afghans. But when I look around the world, there's no question that Canada is leading the way when it comes to settling some of the world's most vulnerable. Thank you.